The most recognizable Christian hymn of all time is undoubtedly Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace has been recorded countless times by a wide variety of artists, including Aretha Franklin, Elvis Presley, Willie Nelson, the Grateful Dead, and the Vienna Boys Choir. Amazing Grace was a top 40 hit for Judy Collins in the 60s, and it was even played by a bagpiper at Spock's funeral in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And if you don't like the original melody, then the words to Amazing Grace can also be sung to the tune of Green Sleeves or Peaceful, Easy Feeling, and even the theme to Gilligan's Island. And I know some of you out there right now are going, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Say, it works. Most people, I think, are familiar with the words of the song, but they may be hard-pressed when it comes to telling you exactly why grace is so amazing. Well, we are in the second week of a first of the year series entitled Discover a Brand New You. At the heart of this series is grace. And in fact, the more you understand grace, the more you will recognize just how amazing grace really is. We last week defined grace simply as God's undeserved kindness. Said another way, grace is God treating us better than we deserve to be treated. Psalm 103 verse 10 contains that idea. He has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor rewarded us according to our iniquities. The Jerusalem Bible says it like this: God never treats us, never punishes us as our guilt and sin deserve. Now let me show you something. While it is true that God's grace saves us, that is, God's grace gives us a place in His forever family, it is also true that God extends His grace to us in everyday life. And that's the truth, that's the message that's presented in Psalm 121. The writer is emphasizing the wonderful reality of a grace-filled life. Now, scholars tell us that what we see in this particular psalm is a song that was sung by the ancient Jews as they made their way to the feast and the festal activities and celebrations in Jerusalem. These Jewish pilgrims most likely began singing this song as they first caught sight of Jerusalem and the hills that surrounded the holy city. Now, as we cross the bridge from the then to the now, we discover that Psalm 21 is a beautiful song of God's grace as that grace guards our hearts and lives. Now, what I'd like us to do is to read it one more time. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. Did you notice some recurring words in this poem? The word keep or keeps or keeper appears no less than 4 times in these 8 verses. And then add to those words the words protect and guard. These terms tell us that God's grace is God watching over us. These terms tell us that God's grace is God paying close attention to our lives. These terms tell us that God's grace is God being immediately and intimately involved in our lives. Psalm 121 says that God promises to be at your side with whatever help you need. That is God's grace. Now, I want you to notice three crucial areas of life in which you can count on God's grace. And here's the first. God watches over you when life is uncertain. Look at verse 1. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From whence does my help come? Well, the reference, of course, is to the mountains around Jerusalem, the ultimate destination of the one singing this song. Those mountains, though looking beautiful from a distance, were anything but safe. Not only was the terrain treacherous, but there were innumerable places where bandits could hide themselves for the purpose of attacking anyone who might be passing by. And as the psalmist began his journey toward those mountains, he probably rehearsed verse 2 again and again. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. In other words, he was saying, those mountains don't scare me, because the very one who made those mountains is the very one who is watching over me. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. But not bad words at all to rehearse again and again in our own lives. Now look at verse 3. The psalmist said, he will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. What does that mean? It means that God has made a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, around-the-clock commitment to watch over your life. The mountains of life cannot be avoided. The terrains of life sometimes are rough, and the danger in life can be as imminent as it is real. And yet the psalmist is saying that we can face the mountains, the uncertainties of life, with the assurance that God is taking care of us, that your help, my help, is from Him. Well, somebody has to be thinking, well, Connell, are you saying that nothing bad can ever happen to me as a child of God? Actually, yes. That's exactly what I'm saying, but probably not in the sense that you may be thinking. See, God has made this wonderful promise that His grace is all over our lives, regardless of how unsettled things in life may become. And the truth of the matter is, the future is always uncertain. Do you know what is going to happen to you tomorrow? No. Do you know what is going to happen to you next week? Do you even know what is going to happen to you 2 hours from now? The future is always uncertain. And sometimes as that future comes upon us, unpleasant circumstances and situations arise. Now, that doesn't mean we always understand exactly what God is doing. We do not. But what we are assured of is that God's grace is at work in your life regardless. And His plan is not going to be frustrated. At a fundraising dinner for a school that serves learning disabled children, the father of one of those children delivered a speech that will never be forgotten by those who attended. After extolling the school and its dedicated staff, he offered a question. He said, everything God does is done with perfection, yet my son Shay cannot learn things like other children can learn things. He cannot understand things as other children can understand things. And then he said, where is God's plan reflected in my son? The audience was totally silent. Then this father continued, I believe that when God brings someone like Shay into the world, an opportunity to realize the divine plan presents itself. And it comes in a way, or the way, that people treat that child. And then he told this story. He and Shay had walked past a park where some boys that Shay knew were playing baseball. Shay asked his dad, Dad, do you think they will let me play? Well, Shay's father knew that most boys would not want him on their team, much less allow him to play. And yet that father understood that if this son were allowed to play, it would give him a much-needed sense of belonging. So this dad approached one of the boys and asked if Shay could play. The boy sort of looked around for guidance from his teammates, but he got none. So he took matters into his own hands, and he said, we're losing by 6 runs, and the game is in the 8th inning. I guess he can be on our team, and I'll try to put him up to bat in the 9th inning. Well, in the bottom of the 8th inning, Shay's team scored a few runs, but was still behind by 3. At the top of the 9th inning, Shay put on a glove and played in the outfield. Now, absolutely no hits came his way, but he was ecstatic with just the idea of being on the field. And he was grinning ear to ear as his father waved to him from the other side of the fence. In the bottom of the 9th inning, Shay's team scored again, now with 2 outs and the bases loaded. The potential winning run was at the plate. Guess whose turn it was to bat? Shay's turn. Would the team actually allow Shay to bat and give away their chances to win the game? Well, surprisingly, this father said that his son Shay was given the bat. Everybody knew that a hit was all but impossible because Shay didn't even know how to hold a bat, much less to swing the bat properly and connect with the ball. However, as Shay stepped up to the plate, the pitcher moved a few steps closer to lob the ball in softly so Shay could at least be able to make contact. Well, the first pitch came in. Shay swung with all of his might, but he swung so clumsily that he missed. Then the pitcher came in just a few more steps, and he tossed the ball softly toward Shay. Well, as the pitch came in, Shay swung at the ball and hit a slow ground ball to the pitcher. The pitcher picked up that soft grounder, and he could easily have thrown him out at first base. Shay would have been out. The game would have been over. Instead, the pitcher took the ball, threw it on a high arc right out into right field, far beyond the reach of the first baseman. Then suddenly everybody started yelling, Shay, run to first! Shay, run to first! Well, never in his life had Shay ever made it to first base. Sort of kind of like my dating life years ago. So Shay scampered down the baseline. He was wide-eyed. He was startled. And everybody yelled, run to second, Shay! Run to second, Shay! Well, by the time Shay was rounding first base, the right fielder had the ball. He could have thrown the ball to the second baseman for an easy tag. But the right fielder somehow had picked up on what was in the pitcher's heart and mind. And so he threw the ball high and far over not just the second baseman's head, but the third baseman's head. So Shay rounded second base. He really didn't know where to go. And the shortstop for the opposing team got him turned around and headed him toward third base. And he shouted, run to third, Shay, run to third. And so as Shay ran to third, the boys from both teams were screaming, Shay, run home! Shay, run home! And so Shay ran home. He stepped on the plate and he was cheered as the hero for hitting the grand slam and winning the game for his team. And with tears rolling down his face, that father said softly, "Those boys from both teams helped bring a piece of the divine plan into the world." It wasn't what Shay did for those boys. It was what those boys did for Shay. I'm oftentimes reminded of our grandson who was vegetative for 6.5 years. How does that fit into God's plan? It was never about what Cooper could do for us. It was about what we could do for Cooper. Did you know the world in which you live is filled with all kinds of uncertainties, which means that each one of us as children of God have opportunity after opportunity to help realize God's plan? Because God's grace is all over us. And we can take that grace and we can put it to work in the lives of those around us. It may be a good idea to stop asking why when something happens that we simply do not understand and just start spreading around the grace of God. It's not what other people can do for you. It's what you can do in their lives. Psalm 121 says that God promises to be at your side with whatever help you need. That's God's grace. Well, here's the second area in which you can count on God's grace in life. God watches over you when the heat is on. Let's look at verses 5 and 6. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun will not smite you. The word smite means to burn with the idea of harm. The sun will not smite you by day. Now, some people say, you know, John, it's not the uncertainties of the future that bother me. It's the uncertainties of right now that I'm worried about. I've got problems that you wouldn't believe. I read about a man in Houston whose business was adversely affected by the aftermath of the 9/11 tragedy. And in addition to that, it was further threatened by the fallout of the Enron bankruptcies. Many of you will remember that. Each day in his life, it seemed as if a new crisis came along and he continually struggled to keep his head above water. Now, most people in his position would be falling apart emotionally, but this man maintained an even perspective. In a conversation with his pastor, he said, if I have to start over, I'll start over. You know, this isn't the worst thing in life that could happen to me. It's not like I've lost my salvation or my relationship with the Lord. And the pastor responded, but aren't you worried about the damage done to your reputation if you lose your business? Aren't you worried about losing your credibility? To which this businessman replied, if I have to rebuild my reputation as I rebuild my business, then I will rebuild them both. And God will help me every step of the way. Now, how could that man talk with such confidence? Well, that's easy. He knew something about the grace of God. See, even when we are compelled to endure the fiercest of heat, so to speak, the psalmist tells us that God makes it bearable. Now, how does he do that? Well, the last part of verse 5 tells us. He provides shade on our right hand. The idea is that of protective shelter. You know, have you ever stepped into the shade of a magnificent tree on a sweltering hot July or August day? Well, if you have, then you know what relief it brings, don't you? And that, in fact, shade is an amazing thing, isn't it? See, the temperature outside hasn't changed. But when you sit under a shady tree, the heat becomes tolerable. It's still hot, but you find yourself comforted. You find yourself strengthened. See, that's the same effect that the grace of God has on your life. He may not take you out of the heat, so to speak, but He will provide shelter to help you bear that heat. Now, God's grace doesn't mean that your problems will not go away, but it does mean that your problems will not get the best of you. God watches over you even when the heat is on. Psalm 121 says that God promises to be at your side with whatever help you need. That is God's grace. Third, the third crucial area of life in which you can count on God's help is this: God watches over you in your darkest hours. Look at verse 6. The sun will not smite you or harm you by day, nor the moon by night. Well, who ever heard of the moon hurting anyone? Well, the psalmist is speaking symbolically. He is speaking poetically when he says that God is at your side when you have nothing to fear from the moon. He is referring to the darkness of our fears. Things change at night, don't they? He is referring to the darkness of our loneliness. He is referring to the darkness of our pain. He is talking about the kind of darkness you experience when your doctor tells you that you have cancer, or when your spouse tells you that he or she wants a divorce. He is talking about the kind of darkness that overwhelms your life when your child admits to having a drug problem or an alcohol problem, or that they are pregnant out of wedlock. You've known times, haven't you, that a frightening kind of darkness overshadows your life when someone close to you dies? Yesterday afternoon, I just felt this urgency down inside to go see Jim Blair one more time, who had gone to hospice just 2 or 3 days before. Time was slipping away. Donna said, if you're going to go see Jim, you better go. You know you need to. I went. She went with me. We stayed just a few minutes. I chatted with Jim, with his daughter. I sang 2 songs for him. One of them was Amazing Grace. We prayed. We left. This morning at 2 a.m., Jim slipped out to be with the Lord. I have to tell you that his wife is a picture of God's grace in action, as was Jim. When the darkness surrounds you, God is there. The kind of darkness that loses a battle with sin. All of these things and 1,000 other things like them bring darkness into our lives. We use words like panic and fear and regret. And it is in those kinds of times that God's grace watches over us. In fact, it is in those kinds of times that God's grace is especially evident in our hearts and in our minds. In his second letter to the church at Corinth, Paul wrote these words: "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not despairing. We are persecuted, but not forsaken. We are struck down, but not destroyed. Listen to this translation of those verses. Troubles are around us on every side, but we are not shut in. We are bewildered, but never at our wits' end. We are hunted down, but God never abandons us. We are always getting knocked down, but never knocked out. How can Paul say that? Paul can say that because of the grace of God. The ancient Jewish pilgrim who wrote Psalm 121 made his journey with the assurance that even in the darkest hours of the night, God would be watching over him, that God would be guiding him safely through whatever difficulty he faced. That was the grace of God at work in his life, and that is the grace of God at work in your life. Some of you are old enough to remember Bette Midler's song, From a Distance. You remember the chorus? God is watching us. God is watching us. God is watching us from a distance. Now, you may like the song, but it was only half right, which makes it all wrong. God is watching us, but not from a distance. God is right here with me. God is right here with you. Now, if we don't believe that, then Christianity is a lie, and let's just go home, close the doors, and never come back again. We believe that God is watching us, but not through a telescope as we face the uncertainties of life. He's right here with us. He is not viewing us from a satellite dish somewhere when we are enduring the fiery trials of life. He is with us, offering relief from the heat. Amen. God is not watching you from a remote planet as you face the darkest hours of your life. He's here. And even the darkest moments, the darkest of the darkness, cannot harm you. Let's look at verses 7 and 8. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul, that is, watch over your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and coming in. He will secure your going out and coming in from this time forth and forever. Notice the phrase, you're going out and you're coming in. As you go through the day-to-day routine of life, the Lord is your security. He wants to be your source of help and your source of strength. And He will be if you turn to Him. It's called amazing grace because God, in His infinite goodness, treats us better than we deserve. And in His infinite goodness, He takes care of us when we cannot take care of ourselves, when life is uncertain, when the heat is on, even in our darkest hours. You can experience His grace in your life. You can live with the assurance that God is watching over you. In your going out and coming in, ask for His help. In your going out and coming in, ask for His strength. In your going out and coming in, ask for His presence in your life. It is a daily conversation in which you engage again and again every day of your life. He is there, watching you. And He will take care of you. You know, this morning I was thinking about this as I was reviewing the words of the psalmist. And maybe we can get this down to an acrostic. TPT. The first is time. Most everything in my life that's been a burden is solved in time. 2 is patience. But that takes time. Relax. Be at ease. God's got you back. He'll get it done. The 3rd is trust. Just trust Him. Now, that's what we say we do, and then we act as if He doesn't exist. How do I know that? Because we think life is over about 3 or 4 times a day, and there's nothing else to live for. Do you ever find yourself in that situation? Or is that just me? Well, T-P-T. Say that with me. T-P-T. That didn't sound very convincing to me. Say it again. T-P-T. Time, patience, trust. That's what the psalmist is telling us. And while we have heaven in sight, like the ancient pilgrims had Jerusalem in sight, there are dangerous areas all around as we journey. Time, patience, trust. See, if we can't do that, we're no different than people who do not know God. My daddy used to say, son, remember you're a Connell. God says, remember, you're a disciple. Remember, you're my child. Remember, I'm always with you. Remember, I never sleep. I never slumber. I guard. I protect. I preserve. Well, I don't know about you, but I think it's time we start living like that. Don't you? Maybe during our time of invitation that's coming up shortly, you would feel an invitation of the Spirit to come and kneel in this altar and just take all those burdens of your life, whatever they are, that are weighing down your shoulders, and just come leave them right here with God. Literally rehearse taking them off of yourself and leaving them here. Maybe you've never come to know God personally. If you'd like to do that today, we can help you. If you'll come forward and just say to me, Connell, I want to come to know the Lord you're talking about. I need that grace. We'll introduce you to Him. He's waiting for you to accept Him. Maybe you're looking for a church home. If I was, I'd join this one. Maybe God's telling you the same thing. Would you come today and just say, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know the Lord and I want to be a part of this fellowship who lifts up the grace of God in everyday living. Let's pray together. Father, we often make life so much harder than it is. It is not that we don't go through hard times, we do. But it is how we go through them. It is what's going on in our head and in our hearts as we go through them. It is our attitudes as we go through them. It is how we relate to you as we go through them. It is how we relate to others as we go through them. It is appropriating your grace regardless of what is going on in our lives. And this morning, we come before you confessing our impatience, our mistrust, our demand that things happen now the way we want them to. And Lord, it just burdens us even more. Your grace is amazing, and we want to trust your grace to lift these burdens, these heavy weights off of our lives. Do that even now. As we make decisions publicly, privately, right where we sit or stand, or in this altar, you're dealing with us, you're speaking to us. Use us to realize your plan in the lives of people around us, that they might be drawn to you.